Many have tried. None have emerged unscathed. Is it possible to perfectly cut the Smash roster? Nah, probably not. But we're gonna try. Smash Ultimate is over half a decade old, and people are still talking about its roster to this day. I mean, honestly, how could you not? The sheer amount of top requests included, the dreams made reality, Ultimate earned itself a legacy that will surely persist long after the next Smash game is in our hands. But speaking of that next game, we are currently in a zone of expectation, more specifically lowering them. Between Sakurai's constant assertions that Ultimate would be near impossible to pull off again, and the sheer number of fighters the game possesses, there's one thing on everyone's mind when looking to the series' future: cuts, and lots of them. What used to be a staple of the franchise in between entries was briefly put to rest with Ultimate, but with Everyone Is Here seeming to be a one-time thing, people are already preparing themselves for the characters Smash 6 could end up taking away. It's even become a bit of a game in the community. Ultimate's roster is ginormous, twice, 3 times, 4 times the size of your average fighters, so if you had to strip that roster down to its essentials, who's sticking around? There have been countless attempts to pull this off, with seemingly none leaving anyone satisfied. I mean, it's Smash fans, what do you expect? So today, we're taking on the challenge of executing the perfect Smash roster cut. Now, in spite of the pretentious sounding title and premise, let me just say right off the bat that I don't think anyone is capable of doing this incorrectly. This is all for fun. And at the end of the day, as objective as I'll try to be with my selection, this is an inherently biased exercise, and an extremely difficult one at that, really. I encourage anyone who's found flaws in people's roster cuts to try one yourself and immediately get humbled by how grueling this truly is. Smash Bros. Has assembled a roster in which nearly every character feels like they provide something to the series' overall identity. Cutting any character, let alone 41, is far more painful than you'd initially expect. So, with all that said, let's get started. Okay, before we can get into all the fun making people hate me stuff, there's something just as enjoyable we have to cover first. Rules. Right? You like those. I'll keep this as brief as possible, but it's important to set the playing field properly and give you context to the decisions I make. I can't just cut Dr. Mario, what am I, crazy? You have to know why I'm cutting Dr. Mario. So, I've assembled a list of 5 pillars in my decision-making process that will more or less direct every cut I make. These are elements that I think have objective importance in Smash's identity, but of course you can disagree and we can get into a whole thing, I guess, I don't know. 1. The crossover. This one's pretty self-explanatory. From day one, Smash's big selling point was being an assemblage of iconic gaming franchises, though of course this was restricted solely to Nintendo at the time. Duke it out as your favorite Nintendo characters. And Jigglypuff. Important as this was back then, the crossover aspect has grown immeasurably in the time since, to the point where it wouldn't be wrong to call Smash Bros. A celebration of video games as a whole. Nintendo prides themselves in this fact, utilizing the sheer number of franchises in Ultimate as its primary selling point. So, our number one goal here is to maintain as much of that crossover as possible. Removing an entire franchise from the roster is an absolute last resort. If I'm given the choice to save an entire series from being cut, or a well-liked character from a franchise with multiple fighters, I am more likely to pick the series. Speaking of said series, that brings us to 2, franchise representation. Now, Smash is already pretty good with this, at least in terms of the fighters they select, not necessarily how they play, but something to keep in mind is how to best represent a series on the roster. For example, cutting Luigi while keeping, Piranha Plant would be a ridiculous move and completely damage the series' representation. I'll do as much as I can to maintain a franchise's proper identity on the roster. 3. Gameplay variety, another big one. One would be inclined to keep a player 2 over a villain since they can often be more popular, but if you do that for every franchise, you're left with a shocking lack of heavyweights. It's important to keep in mind how this hypothetical roster would play. How many brawlers do we have? How many sword fighters? How many projectile users, lightweights, grapplers? All things to think about when choosing who lives and who dies. 4 and 5 are kind of the same rule, but segmented in an important way. First, we got legacy and impact. Now, personally, I don't think this one is quite as important as people make it out to be, and had Smash solely focused on this, we'd have missed out on some great fighters, but when objectivity is the name of the game, yeah, being iconic doesn't hurt your chances. We're trying to leave as many people satisfied as possible here. You can't cut Samus because she's Samus, you know? And this extends to modern icons as well. Spoiler alert, but Steve isn't going anywhere. When crossover maintenance is our primary philosophy, the content of that crossover does need to be considered, especially when we're down to the wire. And finally, 5. Legacy and Impact Smash. Now, Smash has been around for quite some time at this point, and while being a crossover is a large part of its identity, it still has an identity of its own. There are characters in this game that might not be legendary to gaming, but they're legendary to Smash, and cutting them would majorly impact the series' identity. If we're being objective here, we have to acknowledge that some characters simply have that staying power regardless of their outward popularity. So that's our list, more or less in order of importance, and I'm not talking about it for another second because that took way too long. It's time to cut. With 82 fighters on the roster, 41 is our number to meet. Normally, I'd round down to 40 just for simplicity's sake, but I cannot stress enough just how important one slot is in this exercise. That one slot is someone's favorite character, franchise maybe, being thrown into the void. We're keeping it. There are two ways to go about this essentially. The normal way, where, you cut 41 characters, and baby mode, where Echo Fighters are interpreted as their own slots worth cutting, even though that's not really how it works. And you know what? We're starting with baby mode, hear me out, starting with baby mode, solely for the sake of perspective. There's some truly evil cuts that are necessitated by the normal way, and by seeing how tough even baby mode can be, you're given insight into just how difficult the process is, and hopefully, cut me a little more slack. So bam, that's 7 cuts already, easy, 34 more. And here's my first big move of the day. OG12 isn't going anywhere. It's crazy to think about the fact that there was once a time where people thought characters like Captain Falcon were at risk of being cut, but after Smash 4 and especially Ultimate, I think this group's earned infinite immunity. Not only does it house some of Nintendo's biggest faces, obviously, but even the ones that aren't tied to that Smash legacy I was talking about. Your friend might not know anything about Earthbound, but they know PK Fire. Your little brother doesn't know what the Blue Falcon is called, but he knows the Falcon Punch. Yes, not all of these characters are as externally popular as they were when Smash first dropped, but at this point, they're a fundamental part of the series' identity. Even in the event of a full reboot, I think they're here to stay. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go character by character. Princess Peach obviously sticking around. One of the leading women in gaming, part of the main Mario crew, really no debate here. And the same goes for Bowser. Well, except for the leading woman part, but the most iconic villain in the medium obviously isn't going anywhere. But unfortunately, we've come face to face with our first hard decision. Ice Climbers. I love the Ice Climbers, but under the criteria we've set, they don't really have a place on this roster. I think Smash 4 kinda helps lessen the pain since they've been cut before. They don't really have a franchise, just a single game on the NES, and while one could argue they sort of generally represent retro gaming, there's another character who fits that role much better later on. I'll miss their unique gameplay dynamic, but they gotta go. Sheik, this one hurts. Zelda representation in Smash is already so laughable that reducing it further feels wrong. But it's gotta be done. Zelda obviously stays though. Generally speaking, it's pretty tough to remove a character whose games are named after them. I mean, except for that one time, I guess. Sorry, guys. I said I was going to elaborate on my decision to cut Doc earlier, but I don't think I need to. He might genuinely be the only person on this list that no one's fighting for. Something similar applies to Pichu. He's got his fans, but I think there's a pretty universal understanding that he wouldn't stick around in this scenario. Falco Lombardi. Now, he's got the style, he's got that Smash legacy, but I don't think he's original nor iconic enough to survive in a division this cutthroat. If we've got enough space later, we'll come back to him. We won't have enough space later. Marth, Mr. Fire Emblem himself, obviously staying, but I'm gonna sidetrack briefly to talk about Fire Emblem in Smash as a whole. This series has become the punching bag of the community, and with 8 slots on the roster, it's not completely out of nowhere, but people often take that number at face value without looking deeper into why that is. Fire Emblem operates differently than most of these other franchises. It has a rotating cast, meaning that almost every new game brings with it a new main character, new supporting roles, new antagonists, etc. Now, that isn't to say that makes the specific fighters chosen flawless, but it kind of explains the quantity. Take a look at our second rule, the authenticity and representation one. If you just have Link on this roster, you're representing the vast majority of his series. It's Link, that's our main man almost all of the time. If you just have Marth, you're capturing a far smaller portion of his series' identity. Equating the two franchises is silly, I know, but this is why I generally disagree with decisions that amount to cut every Fire Emblem character except Marth, and I'm not even a Fire Emblem guy. Corrin's gone though, get him out of here. Young Link, another child of Everyone Is Here forced back into the darkness, sorry man. And just to get it out of the way, Toon Link's not gonna fare any better. I wouldn't dare touch Ganondorf though. Having the Triforce trio remain intact is absolutely necessary, as is keeping a villain in heavyweight. Now, I'm no Pokemon guy, but it's my understanding that everyone loves Mewtwo. I mean, he's cool, he's iconic, he's got the Smash history, and with Pokemon being the single most popular media franchise in the world, it makes sense they'd have one of the larger casts in this reduced roster. He can stick around. Roy, on the other hand, will be taking his leave. You had a good run. Mr. Game & Watch was who I was alluding to when I said there's a better character to represent Nintendo's retro era. His presence in today's landscape might be non-existent, but if Smash truly is a celebration of gaming as a whole, we can't solely determine who belongs on this roster by their current relevance. Game & Watch does a pretty good job summing up an earlier time in this medium, and his extremely unique aesthetic makes him an easy keep. Meta Knight's gotta stay. Honestly, the Kirby trio is so firmly a trio, well, I guess it's now a quartet, but this trio has so much history that dropping either Meta Knight or DDD feels like you're sacrificing authentic representation of the franchise. We'll keep this series in mind if things get down to the bone, but for now, they both get a pass. In spite of his decade of absence, Pit does lead an entire franchise, which earns him safety under a crossover maintenance philosophy. Xerxes of Samus is out of here. Just like Doc, any straight up second version of a character we already have isn't gonna make it, regardless of how differently they play. I just compared Samus Aran to Dr. Mario. I am so sorry. Not gonna lie, if Smash Wario was just Mario Wario, he'd probably be on his way out, but since he represents a franchise of his own, I think we can afford to keep him. Snake's return in Ultimate is often seen as a one-time thing that'll be undone as soon as the next game hits the shelves, but even if that's the case, I see no reason to cut him from my roster. He was our first ever third-party fighter, and an unarguable gaming legend. The only real argument I see outside of potential licensing issues is that he doesn't fit. I mean, yeah, that's the point. We're keeping him. Ike is unfortunately our third Fire Emblem cut. He just doesn't have the modern-day presence nor the iconic status to justify his place over other fighters from his series. Pokemon Trainer is tough, man. On one hand, you've got the best possible depiction of the Pokemon franchise a fighter could ever display, but on the other, this is 3 character slots. As authentic as this is, and as cool as they are, I don't think I can get away with keeping any multi-fighter slots on here. This one hurts me. Diddy Kong, DK's player 2, his little buddy, is not making the cut. It'll make more sense later on, but we're getting down to the tough decisions. Speaking of which, Lucas, this one hurts me more. As legendary as he is to me, it's hard to fight for a character who's from a single game that's legally region-locked and also dropped 2 decades ago. Forgive me, man. Sonic is Sonic. There's no universe, fan roster, or otherwise where he gets left behind. You know, in a world where we didn't just get Pikmin 4, I bet I gave this a moment of deliberation. Glad we're not there. I'm not sure I get Lucario. I mean, I could say the same thing for 99% of Pokemon, but what's his deal? Through extremely thorough and intensive research that definitely didn't just consist of checking the trivia section of Bulbapedia, I learned that he was voted the most popular Gen 4 Pokemon back in 2020. But is that really enough to elevate him above all of these other fighters and other fellow Pokemon? I don't think it is. As a quick side note, because I think it's particularly relevant to Pokemon, I'm trying my best not to look to the future too much with this list, in that it'd be easy to go, well, I may be cutting Lucario, but we'll get another Pokemon anyway. And while that's probably true, I don't think basing a roster off of those hypotheticals is as enjoyable, and honestly, kinda detracts from the challenge, at least for me. It's easy to go, axing Roy is fine because we'll get a new FE rep, but since we don't have the absolute certainty, I won't be curating my roster around those assumptions. All I can do is look at these 82 fighters in a vacuum and try to use half of them to make the best possible selection in a vacuum. Newcomers are an inevitability, but as far as I'm concerned, this roster should and can stand on its own. Anyways, let's get back to it. We're about halfway through the roster so far. Rob is fun and all, but he definitely doesn't fit that retro rep role as well as Game & Watch does. Cool concept, but one that's hard to keep in this strenuous of a situation. If we're cutting Falco, there's no way Wolf survives. Villager is interesting. I've seen a lot of debate surrounding the Animal Crossing series and a potential cut Smash roster. Who should represent it? Isabelle has essentially become the face of the series at this point and is Nintendo's go-to character when it comes to marketing. But personally, I think Villager is still the best choice to make here. Seniority is obvious, they've been around for near double the time Isabelle has, but I also feel like having the player character playable in Smash feels a little more authentic. Playing as a Villager better conveys the wackiness of taking a relaxed life sim archetype and shoving them to a fighting game. Sorry Isabelle, maybe if you were Nook you'd have a better chance. Mega Man's the kind of fighter you keep for legacy alone. Remember how big of a deal it was in the Smash 4 era to have Mario, Sonic, Pac-Man, and Mega Man in the same game? Not just for fans, Nintendo was crazy about it too. Can't break up those icons, which gives Pac-Man a pass as well. Well, here it is. Our first technical franchise cut. Like I said, these are what we're aiming to avoid, generally speaking, but I think this one kinda speaks for itself. We Fit Trainer. With 3 games under its belt, Wii Fit absolutely falls under the definition of a series, but still doesn't feel like one necessary to preserve. Yes, both Fit and Fit Plus were extremely successful, 2 of the Wii's best sellers, but I feel like their identity is so heavily intertwined with the Wii era that any fighter from said era can pretty easily take the burden of representation. And luckily, we have some far more iconic Wii characters down the line whose legacy and modern day presence far exceed that of Wii Fit Trainer. Sorry to say goodbye to a franchise, but this one was unavoidable. Rosaline is great, best princess, but once you escape the main cast bubble, it's harder and harder to justify additions to a franchise as well-repped as Mario is. Spoiler alert, but Bowser Jr. and Piranha Plant are gonna meet a similar fate. Sure, no one's happy with how he plays, but it'd feel evil to cut Little Mac, the fighting guy, from Nintendo's fighting game. Not sure I have it in me. From what I understand, Greninja was long considered the #1 favorite Pokemon by fans of the series, so he's definitely got the impact. But I think Mewtwo edges him out in both Legacy and Smash Legacy. Again, gotta reiterate, Pokemon is not my thing, so if there's anything I'm not sure about in this quote-unquote objective ranking, it's this. But solely based on how I've seen fans of the series react to both fighters, I think it's a Mewtwo keep Greninja cut situation. Oh, and Incineroar's going with him, sorry. Though that, alongside Charizard, is our second super heavyweight getting chopped. Would be very difficult to lose another one, we'll keep that in mind going forward. Mii's are the Wii rep I mentioned earlier, with us having 3 of them on the roster. I think it's necessary we keep at least one. Smash 4 already had them filling the role of supplemental representation through costumes, but Ultimate opened the door to that so much wider. Without Mii's, you don't get Sans, you don't get Doomguy, you don't get Cuphead or Shantae or Geno. Outside of their own iconic status, they've proved themselves indispensable to Smash's identity. We'll keep Brawler for simplicity's sake, the other 2 can get out here. Oh man. This is how you know I'm being fair. I would never do this of my own volition. They're making me! Awakening is an extremely important landmark in Fire Emblem history, being both a fan favorite and the title that saved the franchise from certain death. Robin is the avatar from that game, and if we're cutting down on most of the series reps, they're an easy keep. Not only do they have the impact, but their moveset is unlike any of their fellow emblems, swapping heavy sword usage for projectile-focused sorcery. This one makes sense. Shulk is absolutely on this roster. He's the Xenoblade guy, appearing in nearly every game in a franchise that's growing bigger and bigger. And as a little personal addendum, he's just really cool. But not that I let that affect my decision making or anything, I'm unbiased. Duck Hunt runs into the same problem as Ice Climbers. Cute little retro throwback that's completely outdone aesthetically by Game & Watch. Back-to-back icons, Ryu and Cloud are absolutely necessary for reasons I don't even think I need to explain. When you talk about genre-defining characters in gaming, these are some of the first you point to. I and many others remember that the moment these 2 joined the fight, Smash just felt bigger. A little more medium encompassing, a little more limitless. That's something you simply can't go back on. Which is something I guess we should talk about more extensively, the can't go back characters. Fighters who made too much of an impact, who've earned their spot in Smash and can never be dropped lest outrage ensue. I think we've already passed some, your Pac-Mans, your Mega Mans, but I'll try to make it clear whenever a new one pops up. Bayonetta's got her own franchise, the unique gameplay, and the Smash legacy of closing out Smash 4 with the whole ballot lie that nobody believed. She's earned her spot. I don't see how anyone could argue against Inkling. Splatoon is massive, one of Nintendo's primary franchises in modern day. This isn't even a conversation. Like, if we cut the roster down to 10, Inkling is part of that 10. Ridley. This is the can't go back character. Like, you throw him in, you acknowledge the meme, you can't just pull up to the next game and be all, sorry, no Ridley. This is almost a unique form of Smash legacy compared to the other characters we've examined. While someone like Captain Falcon has a legacy built up through years of appearances in the franchise, Ridley's Smash legacy is defined by the opposite. His absence is what stood out. Him becoming a fighter in Ultimate was only as big of a deal as it was because of his infamous reputation, the comments made at his expense, the continuous snubbing. Regardless of how he earned this recognition, Ridley is now one of the largest icons in the Smash Bros. Bubble, and that's something that cannot be undone. I've got a friend who insists that Alucard would have been the superior Castlevania rep, and as someone with zero experience with the franchise, I can't say with confidence that he's right or wrong. Castlevania fans, let me know on that one. What I can say is that Castlevania is absolutely deserving of fighter representation, and we will make do with what we have. Simon's a lock. King K. Rool borders on can't go back, but doesn't exemplify it in the same way Ridley does, I feel. Don't get it twisted, this was a major addition to Ultimate's roster, one fully deserving of the insane reaction it received. I mean, I love him. But he doesn't quite have that air of untouchability that his fellow villain did. Maybe it's because he never felt as impossible. Maybe it's because the Donkey Kong series had 2 reps that weren't the same person. We're still keeping him, lest we find ourselves at the cusp of a super heavy extinction, but we'll keep this in mind. Ultimate's DLC leads us to a streak of characters who are getting passes, so I'll try to speed through them. Joker, persona is bigger than ever, reveal was a defining moment in Smash history, he's in. Hero, not as major in the West, but unimaginably big in Japan, untouchable series legacy, 100%. Banjo and Kazooie, one of Ultimate's largest can't-go-back picks, requested for literal decades and making a return to their company of origin. They're safe. Terry, single-handedly repping an entire third party in Smash, untouchable legacy spanning 3 decades, not going anywhere. Byleth, hear me out, keep. Removed from the context of the series' prevalence in Ultimate's roster, there's no reason for the head of Fire Emblem's best-selling title not to make the cut. Min Min, hear me out more. Keep. Put Elite Smash aside for a second, we're trying to save a crossover here. Steve, face of the best-selling game in the world, inarguable. Sephiroth, cut. Generally difficult to justify third parties that aren't bringing a new franchise to the table. Pyra and Mythra, cut. Unfortunately fall under the Pokemon Trainer issue where keeping multiple fighters under one slot just isn't viable. Kazuya's in. Tekken absolutely has the legacy and modern presence to earn that slot, which the character undoubtedly shares. And finally, Sora. Can't go back. You can't vanquish the character confirmed to be the #1 fan request, the one who seemed least likely of all. Nintendo might find keeping the rights difficult, but I don't have to worry about that. This is an easy keep. Okay, not the easiest thing in the world, but I think that could have gone a lot worse. This is what our roster's looking like, and we're still 1 cut short. Oh man. Alright, this is a tough one. Cut or not, I believe every character brought something to the table, but these are the fighters I personally selected, the ones I deemed invaluable. Cutting anyone else is definitely easier said than done. But if I had to pick, I think I'd go with Robin. With 2 reps, Fire Emblem still outweighs a considerable amount of franchises in this reduced roster. Even if Robin represented an important era of the series and played uniquely, they're probably our most expendable right now. Okay. That was extremely draining, but 41 cuts were made successfully. Here's our roster. Let's take a second to breathe. That was baby mode! Echo Fighters do not count as their own individual slots. Considering their lower effort offshoots of their character of origin, it only makes sense for them to live or die alongside that character of origin. They cannot contribute to our numbers on their own because they don't carry the weight of a real fighter. Meaning, we now have 7 more cuts to make. Oh my god. Okay. In moments like this, it's imperative we stick by our rules. We gotta cut down on multi-rep franchises first and foremost. Which, I'm sorry to say, means Byleth is out of here. I know that goes against my whole spiel about Fire Emblem not getting optimal representation through just a single fighter, but with Lucina back on the table, we at the very least get multiple eras shown off. Far better fate than some of these other franchises are going to receive. Mewtwo's next, unfortunately. An icon to both his home franchise and Smash itself, but one we simply can't afford to keep under these circumstances. Pokemon dropping from 10 reps to 2 feels wrong, but a lot of this feels wrong. Moving on. This one pains me. This one is awful. But Meta Knight might be one of our most sensical plays. Having 3 or more reps is a luxury that only our top franchises are able to afford, and as dear as Kirby is to my heart, and as iconic as these characters are as a unit, I think one of them's gotta go. And for roster variety's sake, it's gotta be Meta Knight. DDD's one of our few remaining super heavies. The surviving Guardian is not coming out of this cut alive. I'm sorry. He's just not can't go back enough. We gotta get K. Rool off this ship. His lack of any modern day appearances hurt him here in regards to wider impact. With a gaming legacy that doesn't truly escape the Nintendo sphere, and a Smash legacy that doesn't quite reach the extent of Ridley's, we painfully have to cut the DK franchise back to 1 rep. I hate this, but not nearly as much as I'm gonna hate what comes next. We've exhausted all of our multi-rep side character cuts. We've done our best to avoid it up to this point, but we gotta start axing franchises. Min Min, you're up first, solely because you're not technically from a franchise yet. Call it copium, but in the same way we didn't consider Ice Climber a franchise, ARMS technically doesn't fall under that definition. It's a single game. One that I absolutely believe will become a franchise, but until we get ARMS 2, I think I can live with myself. Maybe. Game & Watch has realistically made it further than he probably should have. I don't know, I think I was holding on to the hope that with him around, all the cute, charming retro pics I cut could somehow live on. In spirit, maybe? But he's amongst kings now. Aesthetic originality will only get you so far. One more franchise to eradicate, and really, based on our philosophies, only 2 could possibly be considered. Punch-Out and Kid Icarus. Now, just to be completely transparent, I have never been more biased. Pit is one of my favorite Nintendo protagonists, Uprising is one of my top 10 favorite games, Punch-Out is fun. But believe me when I tell you, none of that factors into my decision to cut Mac over Pit. What Punch-Out may have in terms of legacy, Kid Icarus outweighs tenfold in Smash legacy and modern impact. Pit's redesign was created for Smash and has since become his default look. He played a key role in Subspace Emissary and provides commentary for every fighter in the game. And look, I'm not going to act like a decade-old 3DS game is the epitome of modern relevance, but a 15-year-old Wii game definitely isn't, especially when fans of that game are extremely critical of how it's represented in Smash. Cutting Little Mac sucks, man. Like I said, he's such a shoo-in for a Nintendo fighting game. But it had to be done. All of this had to be done. So, after pain, bloodshed, and maybe a few tears, here is our final roster. Imperfect, yes, but that comes with the territory with this kind of thing. Overall, considering Smash's core elements, I think this is about as good as we can get. We got away with only cutting 3 franchises from the roster, 4 if you count ARMS, which is the only one that's actually currently active. In spite of losing half of its cast, Smash's vast and impressive quantity of series largely remains the same. And that's not our only achievement. The original 12 were kept, ensuring that Smash doesn't lose sight of its own history. Almost all of the characters responsible for the series' most pivotal reveals haven't gone anywhere, allowing the hype to follow them into the next entry. A plethora of playstyles still remain available, and while we regrettably lost some fun gimmicks like Pokemon Trainer and Sephiroth, other gimmicks like Heroes, Inklings, and Steves are still present. Right? You're happy about that. If there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's that you don't need to worry about this actually happening. I hope taking you through the process so thoroughly illustrated just how ludicrous a 50% cut would be. Nintendo isn't stupid, they know how much of Smash's identity now lies on the fighters within, and while I think cuts are an inevitability going forward, I'd expect like 20 maybe? 30 if they're feeling really spicy? No matter how you cut it, 41 sacrifices so much of what Smash has built to this point. I very much doubt Nintendo would ever consider it. That said, if they do consider it, now we know how to do it right. Maybe. Probably not, but I did my best. Anyways, as always, I'd love to hear what you think. Is this the best Smash cut ever made? Is it the worst? What cut hurt you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.